Since I have been a leader and a decision maker, I have always done it the same way. I always take people at the center of my decision. I come from a sales background,
Mm,
and I worked as a salesperson for a long time, and then in sales leadership before making the change into sales operations. Um, since I have been a leader and a decision maker, I have always done it the same way. I always take people at the center of my decision. Um, be that looking at people by skill set or by what they actually need to develop into their next step. It's usually how I actually make my decisions. I'm lucky in the team that I'm in now. I'm not just a decision maker, but I'm also a doer. And so I've got the ability to actually make decisions for the best of my people while meeting all of our operational goals. And so that's usually what I do. And think about it from also the people that we're supporting. So as an operations team, we function at about 25% support and 75% development in what we do. And so of the teams that we support, which are all mostly client-facing people, so our sales team, our client success team, our integration management team, but then also finance teams, legal teams, everything else. Everything is always about the people. What do we need to do to make these people successful in their role? And so that's usually the core of how I do it.
okay, that's fantastic. So the people are really important. You're right. Ops is a human sport. Um, so the really interesting thing about this then is the relationship between sales ops and sales leadership, and particularly interesting because you've been a sales leader. So what are the lines of demarcation here? How do we form a great partnership with sales, and how do we make sure we're enabling them? And how do we make sure we have this like joint vision and idea of what we need to do to be successful and to help those people be successful, as you mentioned?
And so there is the basic tenet of you need to know your audience.
Mm,
So but that's always individual. Because one sales leader is going to be different from another sales leader that's different from another. But that's always the foundation from where you go. But if we want to talk about things that would be, let's say, best practice or something that's going to apply from situation to situation,
mm,
is always anticipating what is going to happen next. Operationally speaking, I think that's the single most important thing we need to do as operations managers is so that we don't get into that reactive state. We stay into a proactive state. So using my current company as an example, I know what it's like for them to sell this product. I know what's going to generally happen at certain points in the sales process because we've got an extremely long sales cycle in this company. So I can anticipate generally when things are going to happen. And so I will know, okay, they've got a pipeline that is built up of this many tiers at this many times. We know what that general probability of closing is going to be. I know that once we are about 30 days in with, a tier 4 or a tier 3 client, that they're going to need certain things to support them in that. They're going to need a presentation of a certain level, or they're going to need certain data to back this up. So the anticipation of what it is that they're going to need at certain points. It's always one of those things that helps to keep the relationship smooth, is because they're not having to ask for things and they're able to stay focused on what they want to do. And that is usually a salesperson's favorite thing, is focusing on what they want to focus on.
mm,
I think the other thing as well is not wasting time. I think I tend to spend a little bit longer on decisions than I probably should because I want to look at it from multiple angles and I want to make sure that I've got bases covered. But always take the salesperson's time into consideration. What it is that they need to actually shorten this point and what's the most useful to them. Can we give them to that now and not have endless discussion about what we're going to do? Or do we actually need to do a little bit of triage on the situation? That's kind of I guess we would say, respect between business partners,
mm.
just respecting one another's times, because it's not just the salespeople that would be that way. The IMs, the client partners, the finance team, they're all the same. We just respect one another's time when it comes to what we're doing. Keeps it smooth as well, since we are more or less working in a service capacity.
Mm. Really interesting that beginning bit. you're being proactive, you're looking ahead. And you mentioned that, you know what's going to happen at a certain stage. And I'm interested to explore how you know that. Is it using previous historical data and how things typically perform, or is it your sales leadership experience? How do you know what's going to happen? Yeah.
A little bit of both, to be honest. Our company, we're a 10-year-old company, and we've been selling this product now for 10 years. So we've seen enough things that happen over and over again that we can develop a general sense for how the sales process is going to go with each of them. So there is a little bit of that. Some of it also is my own experience in sales, understanding how people receive information, and did you give them the pricing too early? Did you give them the pricing too late? Knowing how that happens. But it's that right there is a tooling thing. So we are very public about our sales pipelines in this company. And I actually send out a company update email every Monday with current pipelines, not broken down by salesperson, but overall. So I then know actually what they are by geographical region. And so I know what each of the AEs has going on in each of their pipelines, what their breakdown looks like, and where their attention is actually going to have to go. We also log everything from email communications to meetings to presentations and everything else. And my team manages the CRM system. So I'm seeing all of this stuff. So I've seen enough of them just time after time to know really what's going to kind of come next, because it doesn't deviate just a whole lot. I would say I can't mention the client publicly because it's part of our agreement with them. We've got a non-disclosure agreement. But we had a very large client that approached us last year. And as soon as I saw this lead come in, I can see what's different about this than the others. And so at that point, I get involved and I start pushing things to a certain location because I know what needs to happen next. And that right there comes from my experience as a salesperson, knowing what I would like to see when I'm enabled and kind of using the golden rule on that. But then also from being a sales leader and knowing what does a person need in order to do their best. So it comes from both, understanding both my business at where I work now, but then also utilizing the experience that I have.
Yeah. Okay. This is really interesting that you push out your pipeline to the organization. It's not something I hear many people do. So I'd love to hear the thoughts and the ideas and the objectives behind doing that.
Sure. This one is probably going to be the easiest answer that I will give you throughout all of it. Our product is extremely complex. And sometimes down to clients having their own custom algorithms. And these algorithms can take weeks, months to develop in some instances. And so when our data engineering or data science teams know ahead of time what is potentially on the horizon, helps them prepare a little bit better. So we try to increase the level of transparency. Now, when I was hired into this company originally, they gave me a broad spectrum goal of increasing transparency, and this is just one of them. They said, we would really like to know, when this might happen. And I said, okay. So we sat down, we did an analysis over time, figured out how to present it, pushed this out to everybody. But then we need to, of course, anonymize it a little bit because we don't want them to know that, this particular salesperson versus this particular salesperson has a bigger pipeline. So instead, we just pushed it out by tier. So what would be the estimated client size? And then we show a little bit of geographic information as well. But it's really just all about transparency and planning for other teams.
Yeah, great. So that's a massive alignment piece then, isn't it? Because then we're aligning the organization, even down to tech, around our pipeline, what's going to be happening in the future as well. Yeah, really, really cool. Love that. You mentioned tooling. Tooling is like the official domain of ops. So like, what's your key tooling to increase transparency and how does it work? And particularly, this is interesting, right? Because telling people stuff is one thing, but getting it so that information is digestible is a whole different ballpark. And I'm interested to hear how you do that, how you make sure people have the space to hear it and to digest it.
So I'm really, really lucky. One of my members of my operations team is a data analyst and Python developer. That is, comes to a matter of hiring the skill set that you need. And so I've got someone who's capable of doing the smallest, most digestible chart to the most complex of analyses, because he also does customer-facing reports as well. And so he's able to do a lot of this stuff. And our CRM system is, of course, critical to all of this, because not only does it manage our pipelines, but then it's also part of our marketing tools. And then with that, I just have an internal audience, or an audience that we call internal, which is just all of our company's employees. And so I'm able to actually send them information, and whether that in like an HTML-based email format, it's where I can send them a distillation of a dashboard so that they can get digestible chunks, or I can send them more complex communications about things that they need that links them back to downloads or anything else. So for us, it's like I've got the skills, hire the skills that I need. I've got a tool that I can use across all of our agreed upon communication channels. And then finally, relevance is trying to figure out actually what is relevant for them to see and hear. Some people don't care about this pipeline email. They're more interested in the integrations pipeline, let's say. On the flip side of it, how long is it going to take us to go live with a customer? Because we actually do the same thing on the integration side. I'll display the pipeline and send that out. I believe that goes on Wednesdays.
That's awesome. I really love this. When I mentioned at the beginning, it's about bringing people into the cadences, the workflows, the processes that define forecasting. This is exactly what we're talking about. So, in a broad sense here, Carl, like what does an awesome forecast process look like? And then how do we take steps towards that? Because it does take time to develop.
It really does. We've got two primary, I'm starting down the line and then I'm gonna have to work back on this one to tell you how we arrive at it. We have two primary pricing models, and our preferred pricing model is actually performance-based pricing. And that makes forecasting really, really difficult, if we're going to be honest. As a platform, what we're trying to do is help the customers of our clients feel more secure in their purchases. So in performance pricing for us looks like how many units did we help our clients sell? How many of those units were returned? And then we credit back what's returned, we charge them for what was actually purchased. So if we've got a client that's coming through that's, let's say we have a five-tier system that we use. If we've got a tier 1 client, we know that potentially, that can be a quarter of an AE's actual sales goal for that particular month, if they bring that in. But then how many tier 4s does it take to get to that same level? Well, there's a lot of flexibility in what the additional tiers look like. And so this is where the forecasting really comes in. So since I am also covering marketing operations, this deals with lead generation. So now we'll start a little bit further back, like at the beginning of what a forecast would actually look like. We need to maintain our lead lists. So this is not just what's inbound, but also what we would potentially outbound on all of these. We know the long-term value of an outbound lead versus the long-term value of an inbound lead is higher. So we know that cold outreach is going to be more important, usually by anywhere from 12 to 15%. Changes a little bit and has actually changed significantly with the pandemic. We don't know what that long-term effect is really going to be yet. So we kind of stick with the same original 12 to 15% higher. So for us, we need to know, web traffic is something that also affects this for us. So like, how do we figure out what web traffic changes are over time so that we can really go after who we need to go after? So for us, it's about tooling. So we need a constant update on certain metrics for each of these clients. So at that point, we then know what our potential market is going to be. It's a really slim potential market that we work with because it's fashion retailers. And so from that, we know that it doesn't grow all of that fast either. So forecasting, super duper important, because if you burn one of these leads, then that's actually pretty serious for us. But since we know what these metrics will actually translate into, and we're trying to get an idea of which clients are actually going to go for performance-based pricing and which ones are going to go for, let's say, a fixed fee pricing. That seems to change from time to time. It's one of our biggest challenges for forecasting. So we always we always pitch this performance-based pricing first and then work our way down from there. And then we will have to adjust our sales goals as we go along. But back onto the topic of forecasting, we know from our metrics that we're able to gather about clients what it is that we need to pull in order to make that particular sales goal. Of course, the forecast itself is based on growth and where we want to be in the growth for the company. So we'll bring them in, know where they are, and then try to get them integrated. Well, for the sales team, that's actually the end of the game for them, or the end of the line. They're ready to, hit back to square one and start trying to acquire the next client again. Because after that deal closure is done, then they're finished. Their part of it is finished. And for the operations team, of course, it's not, because we've got the revenue operations component that comes along with that one. For that, the forecasting models look totally different. We've got our finance-based forecasting models, which are based off of previous 2 months and previous 12 months. So we know where they've been recently, where they were a year ago. And so we do the revenue forecasting that way. And then on my end, because I also manage the billing process for the company, I have what each individual line item brings in for us. And so I can take their live data and run that through the model and say, okay, this month we're expecting X on revenue. So we know what we expect in the revenue model, where that hits according to our goal. The part that we actually miss, and that we're missing right now, is how long does it actually take to integrate a client? Because I could tell you what the averages are by tier, what the averages are by geography, what the averages are by platform. But unfortunately, it doesn't really tell us anything. We can have some clients that, let's say, let's talk about tier 4s as an example. These clients are going to be within a certain range. They may use custom backends. They may use, an off-the-rack platform. And something that a platform service that they've purchased is easier to integrate with because the technology is standard. And but that integration may still take twice the amount of time as another company because of the way that certain things are structured, the way they use APIs, whether they can use an API or not. Each of these clients is so technologically different that we can't really come up with an integration timeline that's going to be consistent along that. So we have an average and we try to use those averages. So revenue forecast, confident in that. Backtrack along how long we expect them to take to integrate affects the actual number for the salespeople. And then once again, working back from there and what we expect from our sales pipelines. It's exceptionally difficult. And honestly, it's one of those things that every time I feel like I get it right, if you ask me again in 2 days, I'll feel like I have it wrong.
Yeah.
I think that doesn't answer the question all that well, but.
Well, it presents a really interesting next question, right? Because, when you look at tech and you look at SaaS, what people are trying to do is create a process that's repeatable, that's scalable. But in your instance, that for good reason, that's very challenging because there is a lot of variation, essentially. And it sounds like you've had to build a highly responsive and mobile organization across the board. And it presents a few interesting intricacies. Not just, how do we see ahead, but also how do we set expectations, for example, and as much as you can talk about it, how do we set expectations for the board here? When we are going for an acquisition or funding, how do we know what our multiples are going to be or what's going to happen next when there is a huge degree of diversity in every single one of your prospects or your clients and how they work out?
And, that one, it's always a particular challenge. Because it's like you can see some of the bigger names that we're working with. There are the clients that are quite public about who we work with, like let's say ASOS. ASOS is quite public about the fact that they use our data and all of that. Well, with ASOS, we did a lot with them and to customize their platform. Their integration took an extremely long time. If we had another client, let's say that's of the size of ASOS come along that wanted something similar to what they had, it may take us months in order to deliver what they need, simply because the integration has to be perfect. And that's what we deliver. I think in that case, our prior performance speaks quite a bit for us and what we've done. Even though we're not able to say exactly when, we can definitely hang our hat on the fact that we do deliver it. So from a board perspective, they're generally happy with that, at least as far as I know. They've always been generally happy with that. But then as far as the forecast goes and where we want to be with that, we're always practical in what we do. I'm not going to say we undershoot the target that we could actually do, but we're honest about where we've been. Sometimes being honest means standing up and saying we may not deliver exactly what you expect this quarter. But by having been honest about it all along, we maintain that level of trust between the different teams and the different stakeholders. And I think that trust is critical in order for us to be able to maintain the environment that we have.
Like you said at the beginning, it's about managing those human relationships and drivers. And that's
It
what trust builds
absolutely
into.
is.
Yeah. Okay, final question for you then. If you're in a room full of sales ops and RevOps superstars, what would you ask them?
Ooh. You know, there's always a question that I want to ask people. And to be honest, I think every time I encounter somebody else who works in another form of operations the same way that I do, we have actually the same conversation. We always ask each other, what CRM system do you use?
Yeah.
And because everybody has one that they're loyal to. If we're honest, I have 3, and I've used 3 in different locations, different situations, just depending upon what I needed. But I always want to know what CRM system that they're using. But I don't think that really answers the question. I think there's maybe a question that I would be too embarrassed to ask out loud. And it's every once in a while, I'll reach a moment where I ask myself, why on earth do I do this? Why have I chosen to do this job? Because I love to plan and I love to execute, but this job can be so reactive from time to time. So honestly, I think the question that I would probably ask them is, how do you sleep at night with all of the reactive choices that we have to make? Because sometimes I'd lay awake and I think about them. How can I solve this next? And so sometimes I just wonder, how are they feeling about how we handle all of that?
Absolutely.
And I guess to answer my own question, I think as much as I like to say that I love to plan, I also like being challenged. And I like it when somebody comes and they say, we've got a fire, can you please put this out? And suddenly I have to come in and do it.